Moving on to the next part of our series on why it's a myth to think that you don't need a lawyer if you're innocent, I want to talk about the subject of mistaken witness identification.
This is an example of some of the great decisions that have come out of the SJC in the last several years. One of them, Commonwealth versus Gomes, where the Supreme Judicial Court has told trial judges that they need to instruct jurors when there's an issue of identification on the science behind what takes place in identification. Your mind doesn't work like a video recorder. There are 3 different stages of how a person remembers things. There's the encoding. That is when you are actually observing the incident take place. There is the storage. That is when you are remembering. And there's the retrieval, and that is when you are thinking about or recalling the event. And the interesting science behind this is, if there's any influence at any of those 3 stages, it can completely taint the memory. And so what that means is someone might not be telling a lie about what they saw. They might truly believe that they saw something, but as a result of an influence that took place when they were observing the event, when they were storing the event in their memory, or when they were recalling it at a later point, that could influence all later tellings of that same story.
Right, so it's called good faith mistaken identification, and so as the name implies, it doesn't involve any sort of intentional wrongdoing. People are honest to goodness getting up at the witness stand and pointing people out and saying that's the person because that's what they believe, but you know what? They're dead wrong. And talk about powerful evidence, Ryan. I mean, you see it in all of the courtroom dramas. I mean, the most exciting moment is when there's the eyewitness who walks into the courtroom. There's a big hush in the audience, and the person takes the witness stand, and he or she points out the defendant sitting in court and says, "That is the person. I saw that person committing the crime." I mean, jurors find that incredibly compelling. There's this belief that when a witness confidently identifies a person, it's because the person in fact committed the crime. But the reality is, because of the 3 stages of memory that Ryan just explained, and the possibility for errors along those way, that the reality is identifications are very often mistaken, and they're not the reliable evidence that jurors think that they are. And this is something that science has developed only recently, and the courts are really only slowly catching up with. But the recognition is that an astonishing number of identifications are flawed and perhaps even wrong. And the issue becomes, I would say, most apparent in the issue of cross-racial identification.
The science is telling us that there is a surprising, astounding number of false identifications that are made when one witness is one race and the subject of that identification is another. And it's just that it has nothing to do with whether or not there are racist undertones or prejudice or bias in the witness who is making that. It's whether people have the ability to recognize characteristics of someone who is not of their race. And the science is showing that they just don't.
Right. I mean, it really is kind of scary, but the data is revealing that the likelihood of misidentification in the cross-racial spectrum is extraordinarily high. And you know, it makes me think of an example of a case that I had. I'm going to say it was from maybe 2017 or 2018. This is a case that I'm never going to forget because of just how really scary it was what happened to this person. So a young man walked into my office. He was of Hispanic descent, and he told me that he was facing a several count indictment where he was charged with trafficking in drugs to an undercover state police trooper. So in other words, there was a state police trooper who was alleging that my client had, on a number of different occasions, delivered drugs to him face-to-face, hand-to-hand. And he was saying, this man that's in my office was the man who did it. Now, to me, when you hear an allegation like that, and I think that any lawyer that's honest is going to tell you that that is the most devastating and difficult type of case to defend, where you have a undercover narcotics officer conducting an identification of your client in the midst of committing a crime. And not just once, but on a number of occasions. But this young man was insisting. He's sitting across me and insisting that he's innocent and he had nothing to do with the crime. And I have to say that his denial gave me pause, just because, I mean, what is the likelihood that a cop is going to be mistaken about something like that? But at the end of the day, I stuck with our philosophy, which is to always give our clients the benefit of the doubt. I mean, everybody is so against our clients. I mean, everybody is presuming that, you know, they did what the government charges them with doing. And so it's important for us to always be that person that's in our client's corner and give them the benefit of the doubt. I did my homework, and what I was able to do was obtain a subpoena from my client's cell phone records and the geolocation data of his phone, showing where he was on the date and time of the alleged interactions. And I was able to prove that on one of the incidents, he was actually at his doctor's office going through a colonoscopy. I mean, talk about powerful evidence. I mean, I had the medical records showing that my client was not where the police officer said he was. Another instance where my client was in a store shopping, and the records from his phone showed that he was there and not where the police officer contended he was. And then a final instance where my client was actually at the gym, and I had his key fob, digital records showing that he was at the gym, corroborating what the phone records were showing, and proving the reality, the horrifying reality, that my client had been misidentified for that very serious crime. I'm telling you, Ryan, if it wasn't for that evidence, I have no doubt in my mind that this gentleman would still be in prison, given the seriousness of those charges. What it shows you is that the mistaken identity issue is real. It can happen to anybody, and it's a very, very serious reason for people to go to prison for crimes they never committed.
And becoming educated on this issue is something that's really important for lawyers to do, and is frankly just beyond what a person who's accused of a crime should be expected to have to do in their defense. I've hired Dr. Ayanna Thomas, who is a psychologist out of Tufts University, who was able to kind of educate me not only on the 3 stages of memory, but also in how this can happen, the doctrine of unconscious transference. And that's essentially, the same kind of belief that you have if you ever waved to someone and said, "Hi, Bill," and they respond and say, "No, my name's Joe." And you've mixed them up and you're thinking, "Oh, you're right, I'm thinking that you were so-and-so." It's not because you just are careless, it's because your mind can play tricks on you. That is a phrase that we've heard uttered because that's what can happen. You can believe that you saw something, you recognize someone, and just turn out to be mistaken. And we're not even getting into whether or not the police have led you into a suggestive identification of someone by doing things like hinting at one photo in a photo array, or providing information saying, "Is this the person that attacked you?" There's just a variety of different ways that innocently, or with police misconduct, a false identification can lead to someone being charged with a crime.
Right, and it really is something that's well beyond the knowledge of any civilian who's not trained in the law to handle on their own. I mean, really, to go through a case where you're subject to police misconduct or mistaken witness identification without a skilled attorney is really a recipe for disaster.
And so one who isn't trained in the law, just laser focused on this type of issue, that's what a good criminal defense attorney is for. And that's why, even if you are innocent, even if you didn't do it, even if you were wrongfully identified as being a perpetrator, you need a good lawyer to help you out.